Hello, everyone. Welcome to Behind the Wheel, an Uber podcast dedicated to all drivers and couriers using the Uber platform. Thank you so much for joining us today. Today's guest is someone who's very passionate about all things sustainability, climate change, and he is Christopher Hook. He is Uber's head of strategy and planning for global sustainability. So let's get this started. Chris, tell us about yourself. Tell us about your career leading up to Uber and your current role at Uber, please.
Of course. So I've been with Uber for about 5 years, but it's going to be my fifth anniversary in a couple of months' time. As you might be able to tell from the accent, I'm from the UK and I'm based in London still. I joined Uber originally to start what we called our London Clean Air Plan, which was a piece of work to try and, as quickly as possible, transition Uber to being the cleanest option for getting from point A to B. For us, that really means encouraging as many drivers as we can to get into electric vehicles. Electric vehicles are the most sustainable way that you can offer the kind of transportation that we offer here at Uber. And so that was a new initiative for us back in 2019. And I came to lead that program, and it has subsequently grown into the global program that we have today, where we have those same goals: get as fast as we can to 100% electric vehicles in all the markets that we operate, both on the ride side of our business, we're thinking about moving people, and on the delivery side of our business, we're thinking about moving stuff. Before I joined Uber, I worked on sustainability. I was a strategy consultant. I don't have any formal background in the environment. It's really just an interest area for me. And I really, as I started work, realized that was something I really cared about and I wanted to make an impact on, and it mattered to me personally. And I'm now lucky to be the father of two young children. And as I think about them growing up, getting the opportunity to work on stuff that I think is going to have an impact for the long term really matters. So that's why I'm here. And I think we have a wonderful opportunity and an obligation, and I'm sure we'll talk a bit about that at Uber, to try and make that impact happen.
That is lovely, Chris. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. And personally, I believe that being passionate about what you do really makes a difference. So
For sure.
now focusing on Uber, how has Uber prioritized sustainability initiatives, and how does sustainability align with Uber's overall mission and values?
So I think that the alignment is actually really strong. I mean, we talk about wanting to reimagine the way the world moves for the better
Exactly.
as our mission, and that for the better part is really where the sustainability agenda fits in. You know, we have the privilege to operate a platform that is in over 70 countries, is used by millions of people every day, is a source of income and work for millions of couriers and drivers. But all of that comes at a cost to the planet today if those trips and that activity is powered by fossil fuels. And so the technology is there for us to transition away from gas and diesel and other forms of fuel to a cleaner future. And we can do that at scale in a way that very few others are able to. And that really does mean that we're going to move things for the better. It's better for the cities in which we operate and the people who live in those cities. It's better for the planet as a whole. And it's also, and this is what was really exciting for me, it's proof that this kind of transition is possible today at really genuinely global scale. I think sometimes people think of sustainability as a kind of niche activity just for a privileged few. One of the reasons that I joined Uber was to prove that isn't true, and that actually it can be for everybody, and we can do it at scale. And I think some of the progress that we've made over the last few years is starting to prove that out. So I think the alignment is super strong. We have some ambitious goals. It's going to be hard work to get there, but I think it's the trajectory is strong and the opportunity is enormous.
Great. Now, when I hear people talk about sustainability, sometimes it seems like the efforts are like far away or like at a super big scale. Could you share some very specific examples of Uber's recent sustainability efforts and the impact that we're making?
Yeah, for sure. It does feel like that sometimes, doesn't it? It's sort of, you talk about the planet and carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, and stuff is kind of hard to grasp and it's invisible, and it's hard to know whether, and it feels like it's everybody's problem and therefore nobody can really own it. I think actually it can be a lot more tangible than that in a few different ways. I think firstly, for the transition that we're trying to achieve, the technology is available. If you can get someone to swap their petrol or diesel bike or car for an electric version, it makes a massive impact to the environmental impact of their business. And it's not just about preventing the planet from getting a bit warmer in the future. It has a really local impact. Air quality in cities is really meaningfully determines the health outcomes for my children and for the people who live in the places in which we operate. And you can change those really fast. Here in London, we have a policy that the mayor's rolled out for only allowing low emissions vehicles into the city centre. Air pollution has dropped by 95% in the 4 years that that policy's been in place, and our fleet of vehicles here in London has transitioned really rapidly as part of that. So that there is really meaningful local impact. The other thing that I think is great about the work that we're doing is that you can feel it. You can get into a Tesla rather than an old car, and it's a nicer experience, and it's a real world experience rather than a hypothetical change in the future. Likewise, on the delivery side of our platform, we're trying to get rid of as much plastic packaging as we can. That's a real experience too. When you get a delivery and you no longer have to put everything just straight into a landfill, it's a much more positive experience. So I think translating it into the concrete and the now is super important.
It is, and those Tesla rides for sure are fun. Just trying to open the door is quite an experience. So I definitely
that's definitely true. We actually did. Some people will have seen. We had to do a little campaign when we first started getting a serious volume of Teslas on the platform, because we were getting a lot of riders write in and say, "This is great, but how do I get in the car?" And so we did a little campaign.
Definitely the first step. Now, Chris, we are a tech company. So what role do emerging technologies play in Uber's long-term sustainability strategy?
They're super important, I think, in a few different dimensions. As I said, one of the exciting things for us is that there is a solution today that can help make this transition happen, battery electric vehicles. And that's different from some other parts of the economy where we still need to invent the thing that's going to replace the old-fashioned technology. But that technology still needs to improve a lot, and we can play an important role in that. So, we're working with car companies and charging companies and motorbike companies and lots of others to prove that they can make these vehicles faster and more cheaply, and the batteries can last for longer. And so there's lots of innovation, some big stuff and some smaller stuff that's going to get us to a point where this is something that's available to everybody. And it's available at a price that everyone can afford. And it really does work for you. If you're a driver, you can't afford to be stopping halfway through your day to charge your car up because it's only got 100 miles of range. You need it to last the whole day. You need it to be as close as possible to the experience that you've had in your petrol and diesel car. And we're doing a lot of work with companies to get us to that point. I'm very optimistic about that. But that kind of technological progress will be massively important to how quickly we can make this transition happen.
Chris, you've mentioned a lot of key players to do the work. Like sustainability is for sure a teamwork. We cannot do this alone. Drivers and couriers definitely also play a big part in this. So how is Uber supporting and incentivizing drivers and couriers to adopt sustainable practices, like such as using eco-friendly vehicles or reducing idling time maybe?
I mean, drivers and couriers are the whole ball game for us, really. We talk about climate being a team sport, and we mean that in lots of different senses. We mean it has to be a collaboration between government and industry. It has to be a collaboration between us and other parts of the economy, so people who make cars or put infrastructure in the ground. But at its heart, it has to be a joint effort between companies like Uber and those who earn their living on the platform, because they're ultimately the decision makers, and it's their business at the end of the day that matters in terms of ensuring they can make the kind of living that they need to make. And so our support there is vital. I'd say we're trying to do it in three ways. One is just use our scale to provide access. If you want to walk into a Tesla showroom and get a car, it's going to be quite expensive. We've tried to ensure that because of the scale at which we're operating, we can make that more affordable for any given driver or courier through rental programs and other other preferential deals. We try to provide some direct financial support. So that might be incentives for, do a certain number of trips in an electric vehicle and you get an incentive for us. It might be discounts for riders to encourage more trips in those vehicles. There's a lot of investment from our side in trying to make it happen. And then the third is just trying to get out there and tell the story. Things like this are important, but probably the biggest lesson for me in the last 5 years is that there's a lot of latent enthusiasm amongst the driver and courier population to make this happen. But there's also a knowledge gap. And so there's a need for us to be a useful and helpful participant in conversations about how do I do this? What makes sense to me? Is it possible for someone like me to make this transition? What support do I get from you and from other companies and from the government? So we spend a lot of time on that. And I think doing that well is a super important part of the strategy.
Chris, we've talked before about how we are always listening to drivers and couriers. So when you meet with drivers, what do they tell you about going electric and about Uber's efforts to help them switch to electric vehicles?
Yeah, it's such an important part of our work, and I learn something every time I get into the back of a car with someone on an Uber Green ride, or I sit down at a round table or an event. I would say they do two things. Broadly speaking, people are very enthusiastic about the experience. People who have already made that switch will tell me that they love the car, the passengers they pick up love the car, and that generally speaking, it's a very positive transition. And most people have found ways to make it really work for them and their work patterns. We actually have a program in a few of our key cities called the EV Ambassador Program, where we have current EV drivers go out and talk to their peers about their experience and all the challenges that they've overcome, and give an honest view of how it's working for them. And that's been really powerful and important. But they do also raise concerns, and they're very legitimate concerns. They will often say, these cars are expensive. How can I make the maths work for me? And that's a process of ensuring that we're doing what we can to bring the costs down, and also drivers are thinking about the whole picture and the ways in which they might save money. And then there's a concern about the charging dynamic. The biggest difference when you get into one of these vehicles is you no longer take it to the petrol station or the gas station. You have to charge it, and if you don't have a charger in your own home, I don't have a charger in my house, and most people who live in cities won't have that choice. That's a shift, and so there's a lot of work that we do on trying to think about how you reduce the anxiety and the sort of practical challenges associated with how do I get the electricity into this car in a way that means it's going to work for me.
Those sound like very significant challenges, and I know that at Uber we're working to tackle those challenges and making it easier for drivers to make the switch. Could you share just a few examples of how we're helping drivers and carriers face those challenges?
I certainly can. Again, it goes back to the point about partnerships and about being a team sport. So on the first one, we're trying to ensure that the vehicles are as cheap as possible. That means helping cover some of the upfront costs in terms of putting down deposits or bring down the price initially. But it also means trying to smooth out some of the costs of running the car. So generally speaking, charging a vehicle is cheaper than filling up with fuel, but it's even cheaper if we can get you a discount on networks that are big in your city. And it's easier for us to do that than, as I say, it is for individual drivers to do it. And so there's various programs that we've put in place to reduce those costs in partnership with rental companies like Hertz, manufacturers like Kia or Tesla or others who are producing cars at a big scale that really works on the platform. On the charging side, that's also true. You want it to be cheap, but it also needs to be available. And so we have been working very closely with some of the biggest operators to ensure that we're sharing data with them and insight on where we think charging is most needed. Tends to be near where people live. And so we have programs in some of our key cities to ensure that new charging gets installed, and it gets installed in neighborhoods that make most sense for drivers. There's a dynamic in some cities where there's very unequal access to charging depending on which part of the city you live in. And we're trying to correct that balance. And we just signed a partnership with Revel in New York, for example. New York has got pretty rubbish EV charging today. Revel are the best player there, so we're going to try and ensure that some new hubs get built in the communities where most of our drivers live and really need the charging to work for them.
I'm glad you mentioned the team sport before, because I've been meaning to ask you, how does Uber collaborate with other players like policymakers or regulators or other stakeholders to promote sustainable solutions for transportation specifically?
It's a big part of our work and our responsibility. I think everyone recognizes, including the policymakers themselves, that the way we're going to get to this future fastest is through collective action. And cities and governments at the state level or the national level have got to be putting in place progressive policies to get everybody there. It's going to be very hard for one individual company, even this company the size of Uber, to move there unilaterally. What that means in practice is we spend a lot of time talking to policymakers about what we see working in different parts of the world. So, we'll talk about what works here in London to policymakers in the US and vice versa. And then sharing data and insights, giving them an opportunity to understand from our business, what we think is driving progress in places where we're moving fastest. And then being a supportive voice. Often policymakers are keen to do the things they know are going to have the biggest impact, but concerned that businesses might feel like it's holding them back in some ways. If we can be a business that's coming out and vocally supporting progressive policy that in collaboration with others, that's really powerful, and we've had the opportunity to do that in lots of different ways. And then finally, being an active participant in some of the big sustainability focused events. These things called COPs that happen every year. They're a big gathering of everyone in the world who's working on sustainability, and we go there to tell the story and also to try and be a useful part of the conversation.
That is perfect. Now, talking about partnerships, and you've mentioned quite a few, so feel free to share maybe your favorite one or the most innovative. But can you tell another example of a partnership or a project that Uber is involved in to promote environmental sustainability in the transportation sector?
Yeah, I'll share a couple because they're from different places in the world, but I think they're really powerful. So we've got one in France with Carrefour, who are the big supermarket chain in France, who you wouldn't necessarily think of as a natural partner on this challenge, but they've invested a lot of money in putting electric vehicle charging in their car parks for their stores. And so we saw an opportunity to work with them to make sure that charging gets used in a way that makes sense for them. And it's also in great locations. Those stores are all over cities. They're in suburbs. They've got, they're easy to access. And so we've now got some dedicated Uber chargers in those Carrefour car parks. And it's a great example of, it works for them as a business. It works for us as a business. It works for our drivers. And it helps address one of those big challenges that I just mentioned. And so I like examples like that where it's not obvious, but it ends up working really well for everybody. The other one, which is a very different context, is we just launched a product called eBoda in Kenya. It's our first electric motorbike product. So in lots of parts of the world, the main way people are getting around on Uber is not in a car, it's on the back of a bike. And you can power those by electricity too. And so we have this product available in Nairobi. It's super popular because the bikes are quieter and a more comfortable ride. It's actually cheaper than the petrol equivalent because they're cheaper to run, and you can swap the batteries, so you don't have to worry about putting it on a charger for hours. You can just go pull up to the station and swap the batteries over. That's a collaboration through with us and a few different players to make it work. But I think it really points the way to the future, and it shows that sustainability is not just something for a few cities in the Western world. It's something that really can work everywhere that we have the privilege to operate.
I agree with you. Everyone definitely plays a part, and the example you gave from Carrefour is a great example of how some players may not be like the obvious go-to place, but we all play a part. So, and that is because this is not easy. Like, there are obstacles along the way. So, what are some of the biggest obstacles or challenges that Uber faces in achieving our sustainability goals, and how are we as a company addressing those challenges?
So I've talked about some of the practical ones already, but it's worth repeating. It's still more expensive in lots of places to choose the sustainable option as a driver or a courier. And whilst that's true, it's going to be impossible to get everybody to make that shift. So we have to keep working together to get to a point where it's not more expensive, um, to make it really scalable. And there are some practical challenges like, how do we roll out an infrastructure that allows everybody to charge their vehicles as quickly as possible? But the single biggest challenge for us is just speed. Like we want to be 100% zero emissions trips everywhere we operate by 2040, which is 10 years or so ahead of the goals in the Paris Agreement, which is the world's kind of leading definition of what we need for the world to be on a more sustainable footing. And we've got some other goals to get there sooner in places like the US and Canada and Europe by 2030. So I don't have any doubt that ultimately we're going to end up at this point. But like the challenge is how quickly, and how quickly really matters, because it really matters to the emissions that we create over that time period, and it really matters to the opportunities for people to continue to earn as governments and others bring in regulations to try and speed this transition along. So the biggest challenge that when I think about every day is how do we go faster? And going faster means addressing some of those cost challenges or some of the access challenges or some of the educational stuff that I mentioned before.
I love that spirit. So, Chris, looking ahead, what changes or improvements would you like to see to promote sustainability even more? And also to support drivers to make it easier for them to adopt eco friendly practices.
So I'd love to see a continuation from us in investing in this, and I'm confident that will happen. And I think we'll see more and more opportunities as drivers join the platform or think about changing their vehicle, that the environmentally friendly option is the obvious one. I'd love to see that backed up by continued progressive policies at the city and the state level. And there's lots of great examples of where policymakers and others are really pushing the envelope on that. And I think we have a role to play to continue to tell that story. And then I'd love riders to be part of that transition too. We haven't spoken so much about them, but we're a marketplace. It's about matching what drivers need and what riders need. I think there's a lot of riders out there, particularly in younger generations, who see this just as a core part of who they are, and they are conscious of the impact they have in the environment. And so the more we are able to say, look, a ride with Uber is reliable and safe, and all the other things that we're proud of, but it's also more environmentally sustainable, the more that's going to resonate. And so, I expect us to continue to innovate in the way in which we make it easy as a user to choose a sustainable option. We talk about making going green effortless, and I think that is really important for whoever we're working with, be it a driver, a courier, or a rider.
I love that you mentioned riders because for our final question, I want you to think about everyone, whether they are driving, delivering, or riding with the Uber app. Beyond your role at Uber, what is one piece of advice you would like to give to those who want to live a more sustainable life in their day to day lives?
That's a great question, and something I think about a lot. I think it goes back to where we started, which was that this idea that sustainability is too big a problem or too abstract a problem to have an individual impact on. That's just fundamentally not true. Big companies have to do things, governments have to do things, but individuals have the choice to look for small ways in which they can make an impact. And how you move is actually a really important part of that. Deciding to walk to that place rather than to get in your car, deciding to choose the Uber Green option rather than to not choosing to get the cleaner vehicle when you change your car, and that's right for you. Those things have a really material impact. One of the biggest ways in which you can influence your footprint, and the signal that then gives to companies like Uber is massively important and really multiplies. So I would say you have the opportunity to have a really positive impact on a global scale and also on an individual scale, and certainly to the place that you live. And how you choose to get places and to get things really matters.
I love this. Thank you so much, Chris. Thank you for sharing your advice and your experience working towards a greener future. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. And thank you, everyone, for watching. See you soon. See you next time on Behind the Wheel. Bye, everyone.